Hello, everybody. This is Gilmer, and I am pleased to present to you right now, and I hope I get your name right, Ilja Varha. Varha.
Yeah, close enough. Ilja Varha.
Well, my last name is Sabolsky, and everybody messes that up. So, I apologize for that. But I've gotten
No
to the
problem. No problem.
I've gotten to the point where it doesn't really bother me anymore. I just say, yeah, that sounds good. So, a little bit of background about me. I did get into wargaming back in the 90s with Gary Grigsby's titles Pacific War and War in Russia. And then I eventually graduated to Asia Games, and I hope I'm pronouncing Asia correctly. I think I've heard them pronounce it Asia before. And I bought American Civil War by Asia, the first version, and never played it. Then I bought Rise of Prussia, which is about 7 Years War, and I got so interested into the 7 Years War that I just played that constantly for a long time, and then eventually I did play the American Civil War. So one of the reasons why I'm really interested in the American Civil War is I live in the southeast of the United States, and I actually live in Montgomery, which is the first capital of the Confederacy. And these people down here, and I'm not originally from the South. I don't even have any relatives that even actually fought in the war. But the people down here refight the battle all the time, and they talk about, well, if this general did this or if this general did that, could they have won? If Lee had Stonewall Jackson at Gettysburg, could they have won Gettysburg? That type of thing. So I was just wondering how you got into wargaming and how you got into the business.
I also started in the 90s when I was a young kid and actually started with simulator games like Microprose M1 Tank Platoon or the F117 Stealth Fighter. And from there on, I started with sort of proper war games, or you could call them light war games like Steel Panthers and Combat Mission and those classics from the 90s.
Very familiar with those. I actually had F-117 Stealth Fighter, and I never played Combat Mission, but I did play Steel Panthers.
Yeah, actually, the Stealth Fighter game was one of the first games where you could actually engage in combat in my country, Finland. You could fly operations through the airspace of northern Lapland and bomb the Russians, and it was quite interesting topic.
Right, I bet it was. Let me ask you: did you watch the series about Grant recently on the History Channel?
Unfortunately, I don't have the History Channel. I can't watch it, but I think the next best thing is I watched the Civil War humor live tweeting it. And if you don't know who this guy is, he's in Twitter and he has quite good sense of sarcasm and he tweets about the Civil War all the time. So I think I got the main points about the series by watching what he's about.
Yeah, it was very interesting. The parts I've seen, I've only actually watched the first part of three, but it was very interesting what I did see. And my comment about it was I thought that the actor looked more like William Sherman than he did Grant, but that's neither here nor there because it's just talking about acting and who did a good job as acting, and the actor that played Grant did a very good job. Let me also ask you, do you have any favorite quotes from the time period? I know that we have the book that is linked on your webpage, Grand Tactician, about quotes from the Civil War. Do you have any favorite quotes?
Yeah, there's a lot of good quotes from that time period, and we also use those in the game to sort of get to the atmosphere, let the generals and politicians of that time speak their mind in our game. But if I had to choose just one, I think I'll take a simple and blunt one. War means fighting, and fighting means killing, by Forrest.
Right. The one I can think of is, and I didn't realize until just recently, probably within the last year or so, was Sherman was the one that quote was the one who said war is hell, and
Yeah, but I
as
think that was after the war.
yeah, I think in his memoirs he said that maybe, but
Yeah.
so we are all on a time frame or a time schedule, I think, right now as of the COVID virus. Is that affecting the team at all? I know it's a small team, and I know that the business kind of lends itself possibly to working from home a little bit more than maybe other professions.
Yeah, this is actually interesting topic. Thanks for asking. We are quite good at social distancing because none of us basically live in the same country. So we are about 1,000 mile apart from one another in the team. And the team, we are not actually game developers, so we have day jobs and we do this as a hobby. So basically, COVID hasn't affected the development of the game at all from our perspective.
Okay, that's great. And just to my viewers, I know that your title, one of your titles, is chief developer and or chief of development, and I know you wear several different hats. Are there any other of the titles? I know you're chief liaison officer as well, but are you wearing any other hats since it's such a small team?
Yeah, basically I'm the head designer, doing the game design. Then I also do other stuff like battle maps, creating them in the 3D world.
Right.
There's another guy who does the beautiful drawing of the maps later on, and also I'm doing sounds, some of the databases like battles, commanders, and stuff like that. So as we are so small team, everybody's doing a lot of stuff.
That sounds great. I mean, and I think I know who you're talking about. Who's the artist? Is his last name is Arar?
Yeah.
And I've actually been reading on your blogs a little bit more. There's a lot to read. I didn't realize there had been so much written in the blogs about the game, and it's funny in the sense because some of the questions I kind of had are answered a little bit in the blogs, but we'll kind of still talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, no problem.
So let's talk about the actual game mechanics and some of the things that are going on. I did read in a YouTube in the comments, one of the team has mentioned that initially multiplayer will not be available, but it possibly might come after it's released.
Yeah, multiplayer, that's something that we haven't done before. And actually, only one in the team has created any games before this. So creating a multiplayer is a world of its own. So basically, we first need to learn that stuff. And considering our resources, especially with time, it's not realistic to go all in, so to say, to create a completely new game with new mechanics and multiplayer at the same time. So, of course, we talked about it, and we are looking forward to, at some point, implementing multiplayer. But if you take a look, for example, at the Total War series with a lot bigger teams and resources, it took a lot of time for them to get the multiplayer working. So, for example, in our case, we are still, of course, trying to get it done at some point, but probably not during months after the release of the game, but maybe we are talking more, at least a year or something like this.
Okay. And that's really more for my viewers because I really don't play a lot of multiplayer games in the sense of against somebody else. I've done it a couple of times with the Asia games, but I think for most people, as long as the game is great, they can live without multiplayer initially, or even if it's a great game, they might not even need it at all because I can tell you, playing a great game, sometimes you just want to be able to sit down, play, and not have to worry about a person somewhere else kind of coordinating with them. So I think the sentiment is do a great job and then worry about multiplayer later is fine with most people.
Yeah, sounds great.
And so I have watched all of the videos and talking about the strategic campaign. There seems to be a mechanism, and I've read on the blogs, there seems to be a mechanism of buying upgrades for the firearms for your troops. How does that work, and is it still in the game? I mean, is it this was all pre-alpha, and I wasn't sure if it might still be in the game because it seems like it might be one of those types of things that if push came to shove and the time was short, you might not be able to implement something like that as opposed to some of the more important type things.
Yeah, it's still in the game, and
Okay,
basically
great.
it works like this. So when you recruit a unit, you will get the sort of standardized weapon for the unit, and then if you want different kind of weapon types available, there's the policy system in the game. So basically, if you invest in policies that are good for the industry, then you will get possibilities to build new kind of weapon types in your own facilities. And the other way to get new kind of weapons is importing from Europe. So that would come through diplomacy. But basically, when you have new weapon types available, you can upgrade weapons on the units, and this is going to cost, of course, and depending on how good your industry level is or how good diplomatic relations you have with Europe, the prices will go up or down. Also depending on standardization. So basically, if you have simple weapon type and you have a lot of those in your army, it will be cheaper. And if you're trying to get something more fancy, that's more complicated to build, then it will cost more.
Right. That sounds exactly how I would think it should be. I know that the Enfield rifle was built in Britain or
Yeah.
Great Britain, and then also you have the Liège rifle, which I think is from the Netherlands. I'm not positive about that.
I would think it's from there somewhere.
But anyway, that sounds pretty interesting. A lot of these types of games, they don't really allow you to change the weapon types, but that sounds very like a very good option to have. So I'm looking forward to that as well, because I know that one of the reasons why there might have been an advantage to the North is because they had available better firearms in the South, was whether it be buying them or developing them themselves. So as I'm looking at, I'm just kind of going through some of the questions I have, and one of them is getting to the campaign play and the strategic overlay. I did read in the blogs about the chapters, and some of the chapters are kind of centered around some of the major historical battles.
No, actually not battles, but other historical events. So we divided the campaign into 4 chapters, which with the first chapter being the pre-war time or the escalation into the Civil War. Then chapter 2 leads to the elections of 62, and chapter 3 to the elections of 64, and chapter 4 is then the sort of late stage of the war.
Okay. So that's and I mean, not that I want it one way or the other. I was just thinking that I see, some footage, I think, of the Battle of Gettysburg maybe, but it's almost impossible, I would think, to try to tie in trying to get everybody to a certain place at a certain time in history and say, okay, here's your Battle of Gettysburg, go to it. So I understand completely where you come from with that. And, as I read the blog, it made a little bit more sense to me. I do see that some of these battles look like the historical battles, but that could probably just mean that a battle happened there, and coincidentally a historical battle actually happened there as well.
We have in the game a couple of historical battles. For example, the Battle of Perryville, which was shown in one of the videos. You can play that as a sort of single battle with the starting position and the force composition that you had in the actual Battle of Perryville.
Okay.
But on the campaign map, you will not have an actual one-to-one presentation of the Battle of Perryville, but you can fight in the battlefield of Perryville. So
okay.
when you start the campaign, you have a sort of historical starting position. You have the troops that the commanders had at hand at that time. and they're placed where they should be placed. But after that, it's basically going to be dynamic. So depending on players' choices and the AI's choices, things start to develop into something, and you cannot steer the situation, for example, towards the actual Battle of Gettysburg without feeling sort of forced on the player. So we want to keep it free for the player, and they can then create their own history.
Right. Well, that makes sense, and I'm glad you clarified that for me, because I was almost getting to the point where I was thinking there were somehow some historical battles were tied in, but that's not anything that breaks the game for anybody, I don't think, because just about every game that I've played with the Civil War, they're not tied to the actual, battles if it's a dynamic campaign.
Yeah, it's difficult to design a game that would be at the same time historical and at the same time very dynamic. So
right.
You go one way or the other. And
right.
we go the historical way with the few single battles we allow, or add in the game that you can play only the battle, and it doesn't happen on the campaign layer at all.
Okay, and like I said, it's not any kind of big deal to me. I just wanted to kind of get a little bit of clarification on that. So I did read in the blogs that Philippe Thibault contacted your group and said, "I've seen seen some of the video or whatever, and it looks fantastic, and I'd like to see a little bit more." And you kind of invited him in and said, "Yes, sure, please take a look at it," because you knew of him. And how did that kind of fall out? Did he just call you up one day and say, "Hey, my name's Philippe Thibault," and you said, "Oh yeah, I know who that is, and I'd like to take a look at your game"?
Yeah, basically Philippe saw our game in a French wargaming site, and then he contacted us and offered to help us with some of the things he knows about the Civil War era, the players who play Civil War games, and marketing, stuff like that. And of course we know him. He's a sort of game designer legend with the Europa Universalis and Asia. So of course we knew who he is. And at a later stage, he also wanted to take a look at the game, and we allowed, of course, that because the game was developed into alpha version at that time. So, and okay. It was very encouraging to see what he had to say about the game after seeing the design choices and how the game actually played, even though it's just an alpha version. It's not ready in any way.
Right. No, that's great. I mean, I'm very familiar with the name, and obviously 95% of my channel is Asia Games. Of course, when this game comes out, that percentage for Asia might go down a little bit more, but
let's hope so. Yeah.
Yes. And but right now, and one of the reasons I even started my channel was because I wanted more people to get to know about Asia Games, because it didn't seem like there were a lot of videos at the time about it. It seems like there are more now, but at the time it seemed like there was a very small amount, but not very large at all. And now it seems like almost everybody's doing things like American Civil War II and things like that. But so yeah, that's exactly why I got into actually making videos. So I did read in the blog about how to manage the generals. I guess you have a pool of generals, and you can you can assign them and promote them at certain points. I don't really know exactly, because I think, as most people know, Grant comes in as a corps commander or even a divisional commander, and eventually gets promoted to an army commander. And is there any kind of problems political within the game if you promote Grant, say, over Halleck or somebody to actually command an army?
Yeah, there's a bunch of problems with that. Mostly not political. So we've divided the commanders in our game into 3 categories. So we have basically the West Pointers, the professional soldiers. Then we have political officers, and then we have volunteer officers. And the idea is that with the West Pointers, you have sort of more experience in in certain way of war fighting. For example, if you have a professional artillery officer, he knows more about artillery, so artillery units under his command will be more effective than with a random volunteer, for example.
Right.
And then we have the political commanders, and these are sort of tied to the support of their home state. So if you have, for example, a big name from Ohio leading an army, it will be a good thing for Ohio's support. But if you sack him, basically then the support could go down in Ohio. So you need to consider that.
Okay.
The other point is that even though you probably know, if you read into the American Civil War, you know who are the actually great generals, and you can also see how we have ranked them in the game. So you have the people with high initiative, good administration, and so on, and then you have guys who don't have that high level of professionalism in their task. But if you have a commander on a high place and he has been on that place for some time, he sort of becomes accustomed to that position. And if you take a sort of greenhorn guy from the ranks and put him up, for example, commanding a corps, then it will take some time for him to get accustomed. So he will be less effective, even though he would have better stats as a person or as a soldier. So these are some considerations you need to take during the game.
Okay, sounds good. Now let's just get back to kind of like the overall kind of general feeling of the game. How excited are you when you read some of the YouTube comments about people saying this might be the best game of the American Civil War they've ever played? Does that kind of create almost in your mind, man, we better get this right, or is it, or you were already going to get it right no matter what they said?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we started this project in 2016, and at that time it was just me and Oliver, who is the coder of the game. And Oliver also made the 7 Years' War game previously, which was released in 2015. Mm-hmm. And the idea was simply to create a game about the conflict we both thought was very interesting. And at that time, the level of ambition, so to say, it was very low. So we didn't plan on anything fancy or anything like that. So we planned the game, what we would like it to do and feel, and we wanted to make a game we would like to play ourselves. And during the development since 2016, it's now the fourth year in development, we ran into a number of people who were interested in helping making the game, and also interested in the game itself. So, for example, that way we got Wasel Arar into making the beautiful maps to the game, which of course makes it look a lot better and more interesting, and that way more people found the game and so on, and it has been sort of growing on during the years. And I think it was sometime early this year when a lot of people compared to previous years started to find the game. I think it was around the time when we released the video about the campaign gameplay. And after that, we have had a lot of good positive feedback. And of course that is very flattering and encouraging, but at the same time I think it's a bit scary as well, because hopes seem to be very high, and yeah, it's building some pressure for the team. Well, but of course, I'm not going to sell our project short here, but I think we are quite realistic guys, and we are not going to brag about the game as such. But we also know that if you compare resources with our team with some other teams, it's a totally different play field for us. But for us, this is a sort of a project of passion, so to say. So I think we are doing a good job, and the game is going to be good. But yeah, the expectations, they are building up some pressure.
Well, I have to say that when I watch the pre-alpha footage of the battles, and I actually have the Battle of Perryville up on the screen now as I'm recording, in the kind of in the background, it looks very polished, even as a pre-alpha video. It just looks very, very polished to me. So I can see why some people might have some big expectations of it, because it looks as good as any release game that I've ever seen.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good thing to hear.
And let me ask you: is the release date still planned for summer of 2020? Or, well, you probably want to put that out in a press release if it changed, so I don't want to, steal your thunder or anything like that if anything changes. And, obviously if it was pushed back, people would be a little bit disappointed, but I do think that people want you to get it right as opposed to getting it out quickly. So
according to the feedback, people are saying that okay, get this right, no hurry. But we are still on track for summer release with the game, and nothing has changed in that.
Okay.
Well, hopefully everything goes fine and we get it out this summer.
Well, and with Steam now, they have this thing where, and I never used to see this before, but with Steam now they have things come out in beta, and then later on it's actually released, but you can still buy it in beta. Are you thinking of anything kind of like that, or are you going to just wait until it's finished and then release it, and that's when everybody can play it?
Yeah, Steam allows early access titles to be released, so basically putting game out before it's actually finished, but we are not thinking about that at the moment. We are pushing on with the development, and we are actually hoping to get it ready for summer.
Okay, that sounds good. And the last question, because I know you don't want to get this interview going too long, but I do have one last question, and I did read about the blog sort of how you win the game, but I want you to kind of flesh it out a little bit. There's a mechanism for breaking the morale of the opponent, and then there's also something along the lines of the elections might cause the game to finish if the elections go badly for the Union.
Basically the winning of the war mechanism it's the same, so one side needs to lose enough morale to actually break, but how you can achieve that, you can fight battles, so casualties and losses, of course, will hit morale, and we're talking about the morale of the nation and the citizen, not only the soldiers in the field.
Okay.
So there's no basically any sudden death modes. So, for example, if you, as the Confederacy, if you take Washington D.C., if the northern people still have the morale to fight on, then the war will continue, but of course a loss of capital city will be a big hit on morale. And of course stuff like economy losses, military actions on your neighborhood and stuff like that, it will lower the morale, and when the morale goes down it will not be coming back up again, so basically people will eventually be tired of the war and will no longer support the war.
Okay. And of course, I didn't ask anything about the economy, but it does look very detailed. You produce a product here, get it to a manufacturing place here to create a further product and that type of thing, which I haven't really gotten a chance to talk about that, but maybe that would be in maybe a later interview or video where I talk a little bit more about it, because it looks very detailed. I think I read 30 different economic products are produced.
Yeah, and the idea of the economy is that player is not in full control of it, so you don't have to micromanage anything. It all happens in the background. But basically this creates the dynamic of supply and demand. And when you, for example, using a blockade to block imports and exports, you can hit the other side's economy in the game, or you can do it by raiding and hitting lines of supplies and stuff like that. And this creates the situation where prices start to go up, and this will, of course, influence the people as well. So even though in the background there's a lot happening in the economy, for example, the production chains of different goods, the player doesn't need to actually worry about this. It happens automatically, but at the same time, you can target the enemy's economy, or you can be a victim of sort of trade warfare, and this will be a problem in the long run, like it was in the real Civil War. The blockade, it was on for years, and during the end of the war, the southern economy, it was basically collapsed, and you can do the same thing in our game.
Okay. And I'm sorry I kind of sprang that question on you, but it seemed like you might want to talk a little bit about the economy. You kind of touched on it just briefly, but thank you very much for discussing the economy question, because I know it wasn't necessarily something we were planning on talking about. But that is it for the interview. I thank you very much for the time you've spent today, and I'm sure my viewers will as well. Thank you very much. It looks like a great game, so good luck.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
And I'll just turn off the recording and we'll talk a little bit more.
Okay.
Thank you.